Hi, this is Chris Fox, author of Write to Market in 5,000 Words Per Hour, and you are listening to GenreTainment.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of GenreTainment at SciFiPulseRadio.com. I'm your host Marx, going solo for this episode. Julie wasn't able to join us today, but shall return in our next episode. So GenreTainment is where we talk about what's happening in the world of film, TV, books, and web series. We give you interviews with writers, directors, producers, and actors in both independent and not so independent creations. You're listening to episode 119. Today I'm chatting with video game writer, novelist, screenwriter, and podcast host Justin Sloan. We talk about his fiction books, his non-fiction books, writing for video games, how being a veteran has affected his writing, and so much more. You may have heard me on his Creative Writing Career podcast. That interview actually happened first, but I got a little sidetracked traveling to ITV Fest, so this interview was delayed. But if you missed it, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can hear Justin get his turn interviewing me. Before we get started with Justin's interview, I should point out that the music you just heard at the beginning of the show was a snippet from the theme song for our web series, Reality on Demand. A song composed and performed by our friend T. Sean Hardy. You can find our web series at realityondemandseries.com. Now let's get started with our interview with writer Justin Sloan. So welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
So I was introduced to you from Michael Laron, a previous guest. Yeah. And because I think you guys are working on something together.
Oh yeah, something humongous.
Humongous.
And when I say that, I don't mean page length, because actually the page lengths are pretty short, but in breadth and feel and emotion, oh my God. It's going to blow your mind. Oh, it's actually, okay. I think we're going to come out with it pretty soon. I think we're looking at like maybe October. We might do a exclusive release through InstaFreebie, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but I'd be happy to chat about. Oh, I love it. I'm not actually. I just started like a week ago and I already have, it's a way you put your books out for free and you can get email signups for your newsletter, but it's only $20 a month. And in 1 week, I've gotten 213 subscribers, which is pretty good for $20 a month.
That is pretty good.
And so if you carry that through, and I haven't started group promos, so there's this whole topic we go on about group promos where supposedly you get way more numbers. And yeah, so if I come out with like 1,000 or 2,000 a month, I'm going to be like, oh my God,
That sounds great. So it's sort of like BookBub then, in a way?
Not at all.
No, not at all.
Because BookBub just rejects me over and over and over again. So not BookBub. I love it. They accepted me once a long time ago for a children's book I had, but children's books don't sell as well as other books, So like it was cool and it did well and it made its money back and it carried over for like 2 months and then kind of died off. So I really want them to accept my fantasy trilogy or the first in the fantasy trilogy because that would be amazing, to get the income streams going. But yeah, no, this is more like something like Selz. I don't know if you heard of that, SELZ. Basically, you just put your book on there. It's free, but the only way readers can get it is if they subscribe to your newsletter. So they put their email into that box. So instead of like BookBub where they sign up up front, here you go and you say, oh yeah, I do want this book. And you enter your email address and click, I subscribe to this newsletter. And then you get the book just like that. So, and you can pick and choose different books, and then you end up subscribing to all those newsletters, whoever you end up picking and choosing from. Which is great for the group promos also because then they're not signing up for like the whole group and getting all those email address newsletter signups. They're signing up for just the individual books within those group promos that they want. So they're still tied to that author, specific to that author. So when you get an email, this person wants to hear from you or at least wants to check out your book, which is great.
That sounds pretty cool. Where can people go for that? Is that like something you put on your individual site or is there an actual place?
Yeah, there's a website called instafreebie.com, I think. And it's kind of cool about them is the more you share it, the more they share you. So I should have actually on my website, the first thing you see when you go to it, one of my websites, I have 2 like author sites because one I'm like including all my screenwriting and video game stuff. And on the other one, I'm just doing author stuff. So the multi-everything site is justinmsloan.com. The other one is justinsloanauthor.com. And I think the first link on both of those, definitely the Justin M. Sloan, the first thing you'll see is one of my Insta Freebie giveaways. It's a fantasy thing. It's from my trilogy, but it's episode 1 plus some short stories that are exclusive to that website, to the Insta Freebie website. So yeah, so if anybody wants to go check that out.
Awesome. Because I did get a few freebies of yours. I don't know if it's through that. I think it's just your normal email subscription.
Oh, cool. You signed up for that?
Yep.
Where'd you see that on? JustinSloanAuthor.com or something else? Oh, cool.
Yep, Justin Sloan Author.
Oh my God, I'm giving away too much stuff, huh? Like you sign up for that and you get 3 books. How it works on Instant Freebie is when you sign up and you get whatever book's on there, and then it signs you up for my regular newsletter. So then like a day or 2 later, you'll get the email with those 3 books in it. So right off the bat, somebody has 4 free books. It's like, wow. When are they?
That's great.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you get these whale readers, right, who just like plow through this. They're just like, mouth open, absorbing it all. And then those are the ones who might go buy your next stuff, or at least leave nice reviews and want more free books that they'll leave nice reviews on.
I never heard the term whale reader until like 2 days ago, and now I heard it again.
It's everywhere all of a sudden. It's because of Michael Anderle, I think. He loves that term, and then now everybody's using it. I don't know who started it. I'm sure it started before him, but it makes sense, like the whales, they just go, their mouths open, and things just go into their mouths, and they just absorb.
All right, so we had a very odd start to this interview.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Justin.
So Justin, you're an author, you're a video game writer, you are a screenwriter, you're a writer of everything just about. So I don't know about plays, but you're a writer of just about everything.
I haven't tried plays. I haven't tried, I don't do erotica or any kind of like weird things in that area. Mm-hmm. But as far as like multiple genres and multiple media, I try, because I have a theory on this too, which is that the more things you try, like the more doors that you have, the more likely one of those doors will open, right? Mm-hmm. So instead of just trying to be a novelist, and I get the other argument too, that if you focus on being a novelist, you might succeed at that quicker. But if you're trying to be a novelist and a screenwriter and a video game writer, any one of those doors might open for you before the other ones. And if you hadn't tried all of them, you never would have known. So for me, it kind of happened where I was trying to be a screenwriter / novelist, and the video game door opened because I was open to that. And then I went and became a video game writer. And while I was there, I started publishing my books and got a screenplay or 2 option. And I say or 2 because one was like $1 option and one was an actual option. So yes, I try all that: screenwriting, video game writing, novel writing.
Let's talk about one thing I heard recently about with you. I'd read Crash from David Wright and Sean Platt recently. For some reason, it took me forever to read it. It was a really good book, really good short novel. And I just heard that you adapted it and it actually got sold.
Yeah. So who'd you hear that from, by the way? Curious.
I don't know.
I was just wondering if it's
I might have heard it from your email list that I signed up for.
Oh, I think I put it on my website too. So I don't know if you saw that, but it might have been on the website. But so Sean and them apparently had Kevin on their podcast recently, and they talked about it. So I don't know which one's airing first, yours or their episode, but that's out there. And Sean has mentioned that we were doing it a long time ago. But yeah, so Sean and I worked on it together, actually. So it wasn't just me. And so we had to do like an agreement between the 2 of us, and then the 2 of us had to option it from him and David. So it's kind of this funny, weird paper thing going on there. Oops, keep knocking the headphones out of my ear. But so we went through this service that this guy named Ashley Scott Miller, who I'll give a little shout out to because he runs a cool podcast called Selling Your Screenplay. Awesome podcast. And what's cool about how it worked out is we had him on our podcast, and then we chatted about this list he has where he sends it out to his crew, it's like people of all these producers and managers and whatnot he's met over the years. And a lot of times in screenwriting worlds, you hear that those lists are lame, but I was like, you know what, this guy sounds smart, and he sounds like he's known what he's talking about. So let's try it. After trying a few other things that weren't really working, we tried that. He blasted it out to his email list, basically just the log line, just the 1-sentence version of what Crash is all about. And within like 2 days, we had like 20 or 30 people saying, yeah, let's read this. I want to read this. And then within like 5 days, we had 5 producers like, hey, I want to get it. Can I get it? Can you option it to me? And then we ended up narrowing it down to like 2 who were really willing to pay. And then we ended up going with the one we liked the most. So it was a pretty cool experience that I'm not used to. Like usually you write a screenplay and it takes you a year or 2 and you're trying to shop it around. You might get a little tension, some screenplay wins, contest wins, whatever. But this one we finished. I think we tried some things like ink tip for like a couple weeks, and then we did this, and it was like boom, and it was gone. Like wow, it was pretty cool.
That's very cool. Well, I really like the story. I hope it gets made. Is there any dramatic difference in that story? Is there like, I don't know.
You tell me. Let's see. I want to. I know you haven't read the screenplay, but one thing that I thought's really cool about that. So I guess I'm going to spoil it for people right now. So people who don't want to be spoiled, cover your ears. But what's really cool going on in that script, which you might feel kind of corny at first, is it's about a guy who's taking pictures of car accidents because he lost his daughter in a car crash. And so he's trying to capture something by taking these pictures, like find something about himself. But then he starts seeing an image of a man in those pictures. And he's like, what the hell is this? And then he tries to show it to people, but nobody else sees it. and things start happening. He starts hearing his daughter's voice. He thinks that, she's a ghost. She's here. She's trying to like connect with him or something like that. And he's like, what the hell? What's really cool about some of the things we added to the script that weren't as much in the book, or like there's the pharmacy scene where he kind of has a flashback to his daughter. And here we made it more like he's tripping out. Like he kind of sees his daughter. He's like, is that her? Is that not her? And like some weird moments like this. And later there's some cool stuff where he sees her again. He kind of sees her face and he thinks he's seeing the ghost, right? But not really. He hears her voice too. And he's like, well, I'm hearing her voice. I'm seeing her face. How's the ghost? But then you find out, here's the big spoiler for people who haven't read the book or my screenplay, mine and Sean's screenplay. You find out he's in a coma and that he wasn't hearing his daughter's voice from the afterlife. He was in the coma and she's in the hospital. And so his eyes were kind of opening and he's kind of seeing her. And that's what he saw. And he's hearing her because he's kind of gaining consciousness a little bit. And then he's getting closer to the moment where he's going to wake up. And then he's this guy who he's seen. I won't spoil that part for you. There's other parts there's more reveals, there's more stuff. I don't want to spoil all of it. But that was like the really cool part that I thought was kind of there in the book, but we brought a lot more in the screenplay version of it. And I think it'll be more cinematic too, because all that stuff you could see and you see the blurriness of her and all that. And then when it actually is revealed, you're like, oh my God, So I think it'll be really fun. I think the producers are so excited and they put enough money into it that they would not want to not let it get made. Knock on wood, fingers crossed and all that, of course.
Well, good. I think it'll make a good film. I read it and I was like, that would be a good film, I think. That's
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those kind of movies sell real well too. Like they're easier to sell, those screenplays, because like psychological, horror, thriller, suspense, whatever you want to call it. There's definitely a market for that in the screenplay world. And so we went indie. It's not like a big studio. It's not Fox or something. And these indie filmmakers love to do that kind of stuff, especially this really touchy-feely. Some of the revelations that I didn't talk about right now that you're probably aware of, like that stuff, it hits you. And when you're in a movie film festival like Sundance or something, that's going to be the stuff that wins the awards, I think, and gets the audience like, yeah, cheering for you.
Yep,
so
I agree.
I hope.
I mean, and it's a lot easier than like some of the other work, like Yesterday's Gone, which is massive cast and it'd be crazy. That's a high budget film, unless you're.
Yeah, I actually had a producer asking me about what other projects do you guys have? What else can we get going? And he was really interested in Yesterday's Gone and Invasion, and we haven't moved forward yet because those would both be more like, if we want to work with a big studio, yes. If we want to work with indie producers, probably not gonna happen.
Yeah,
so easily.
While
we're on the topic, I wanted to.
Sure.
I was just saying, while we're on this topic of like film adaptation stuff, something that's pretty cool that we're kind of slowly announcing, so in like baby steps, we can chat more about it as it becomes a real thing. And it is real already, but it's not like solid. Is P.T. Hilton and I, he's an author who knows Michael Aron and all these people also. We're working together to adapt some novels into screenplays, and we're writing our own teleplay. We did a teleplay that's doing really well in a contest right now. It's in the top 50, and we're hoping it gets to the top 10, because then you get this year-long mentorship. And if you win, then of course you get to like pitch AMC and all this stuff. So that's pretty cool. But what we're also doing is we're adapting John L. Monk's novel. I don't know if you're familiar with John L. Monk, but he's an amazing author. He has a book called Kick, and it's really good. And so it's, oh my God, it's basically like Quantum Leap meets Dexter. It's a guy who he killed himself. He's committed suicide. He keeps getting reborn into serial killers' bodies and basically having to figure out what they're doing, like how they're killing people or whatever, and stop them from doing it, and like either kill them or put things right or whatever, But then something happens where he wakes up in one body one day and he can't figure out what the guy did or what's wrong with the situation. And then the cool stuff happens and you get all teary-eyed and you stay up till 4 a.m. reading it. So that was my situation. Oh my God, I was getting all emotional. I'm up at 3 or 4 and I have to go to work the next morning. And I'm like, what the hell, man? I wrote him. I'm like, I'm pissed at you. You kept me up all night. So when you get a book like that, you have to make it into a movie. And so P.T. Hilton and I are working with John to make that happen. And we're actually going to kind of start a business. So this will be some stuff I'll be talking about on future podcasts in the near future. So you're lucky to hear it here first. PT and I are going to be working with other authors to do the same. And we might go a little bit of vice versa also with screenplays to novels. So.
Yeah, I heard you hint around about that a little bit on your podcast or something.
Yeah, we've been kind of doing it here and there, and talked about John L. Monk's stuff a little bit. So thanks for listening, man.
Yeah. I do my research.
Cool.
And the Sloan Zone. I have watched a few episodes of that.
Who gave me that? Oh, Luke Condor. He has a podcast called Luke's Massive Storytelling Thing or something like this. Sorry if I got it wrong, buddy. Anyway, so he wrote me jokingly, I think, one day, and he was like, "You should call your podcast the Sloan Zone." And I was like, "Whatever, that's stupid." And then like 3 months later, I was like thinking about doing a YouTube channel because everybody's doing it. And I was like, I'll just call it the Sloan Zone. If anybody hates it, I'll stop. And then it just stuck. So,
yep. So we should talk a little bit about your book series because you have like 3 or 4 of them, I think. Let's talk about Bringer of Light, because I've seen that Allie Strom and the Ring of Solomon, which is the first book. I've seen it a few places now. Can you tell a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that one. So maybe I'll go in order a little bit too, though, if you don't mind, just because. So I won't go into the details of the one, but I started writing back in the day with the first book in the Falls of Redemption trilogy, which is fantasy, and that was it's now become the first book is called Land of Gods. But that went in all kinds of different directions, for years, for 6 years, I think I was kind of playing with that, revising it, changing it completely. In the meantime, I started writing some other novels, a couple of those being, a few of them were just screenplays at first, and they weren't novels, such as Back by Sunrise and Teddy Bears in Monsterland. And I was thinking, I want to write for Pixar, or Disney, these would be what I would, just trying to get into the zone of that. And here's my calling card type thing. Mm-hmm. But then I said, okay, well, I want to write another novel now. I want to do something, at one point it was totally different. It was kind of more like, it does become this kind of, but it was kind of Guardian Angel-esque, kind of like Harry Potter Guardian Angel-esque, without being too Harry Potter, because I didn't want to try to rip it off, but that was the inspiration there. I was like, I love the idea of these characters who are so emotionally attached to each other, and so, in this magical world, but it's not all about the magic, it's about them and their relationships to each other and their family and all that. So I made that with the first version of the Allie Strom Bringer of Light trilogy. And then, of course, same idea, it sucked. It was stupid. I revised it like crazy. And that became this, what it is now. And then the first book's Allie Strom and the Ring of Solomon. She finds this necklace in her closet and finds out the same day that she finds her necklace, that she never saw her mom without that necklace. She finds out that her mom has gone missing in the military. She's been deployed overseas and they don't know where she is. And so it's really weird that she found this necklace on the same day, right? Well, anyway, weird things start happening, magic. And she has to save her mom. And there's this whole fallen angel kind of cult-like thing going on there. And spoiler, the stone in her necklace ends up being the ring from the Ring of Solomon, which is rumored to control angels and demons according to actual mythology and that part of the world. So I incorporated all that. And then book 2 and 3 get even wackier and crazier, of course.
Cool.
Long answer.
And you can get that book if you subscribe to the email list, right?
Yeah. I'm always toying with which books to give in that list, and does it make sense? Because right now I give away Back by Sunrise, Allie Strom, The Ring of Solomon, and Land of Gods. It's totally different books. Back by Sunrise and Allie Strom aren't too different, because actually it's different age groups. Allie Strom is more for 12, 13, and Back by Sunrise more 9, 10. But the little girl from Back by Sunrise ends up being the mom in the Allie Strom books. So that's kind of my fun tie-in there. I like to tie in trilogies like that, where you just have one little thing that, and so the necklace actually in Back by Sunrise is the same necklace that Allie Strom gets that ends up being the ring and all that. Spoil it. But, these are kids you're going to have your, or books you're going to have your
spoil zone here.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm figuring, you got to know what's exciting about it, or you're not going to want to have your kids read it. So
true.
I won't spoil Land of Gods for anybody. I don't think. Who knows what's going to come out of my mouth, right? You never know. but that's the question for you is it weird to get the email that has Back by Sunrise, Allie Strom, and the Land of Gods? 3, or at least Land of Gods, that's violence. It's kind of based on my military background with ancient Peloponnesian War influences, has warfare, of course, and all that stuff. So it's going to be a different audience, I would think. But I've had a few readers who are like, oh my God, this is all perfect. And it blows my mind, because I wouldn't think that they would want to read those books together. Thoughts?
That's tough, because you do have different age groups.
Yeah.
I guess because I don't know, but I would guess parents would get the books first most of the time, rather than a kid join an email list and getting the books. I
don't think kids are allowed to join an email list. I think there's something legal, where you're not supposed to get teenagers or kids or something on your mailing list. I could be totally wrong about that.
At least 13 or under, maybe more than that.
I think this is my thought too. So, your parent, as a parent, you get the email, or as a grandparent or whatever, and Land of Gods is for you. The other 2 books you can also read and probably enjoy, because I wrote them in that Pixar style where everybody should like them. But they're more to hand off to your kids or grandkids.
Yep, I think it makes sense. Maybe someday, if you have more series that are mature, then you might want to split it at some point. But I think right now it works. Yeah,
I have actually split them inside of there. I think what I do is in the second or third email, or maybe I haven't yet, but I plan on it. I think I've done it. I don't know. Anyway, so in the second or third email, I say, okay, now that you've seen what I'm doing, if you want to join my kids' mailing list, here it is. Otherwise, we're going to continue down this fantasy route. And the main reason I did that is because like 90% of my mailing list has found me through a thing called Author Platform Rocket, where I was giving away Land of Gods. So they're all fantasy people. And so it's kind of weird to have that whole list of fantasy people also be pinged with all these emails about kids' books. So it has begun, the process of separation.
I think I did hear a little bit about you. I think you were a guest on some podcast a while back, because I remember hearing someone talking about writing for Telltale Games and Game of Thrones. I'm assuming that was you.
Yeah.
And so
Probably.
why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience and about writing for Game of Thrones?
Sure. Yeah, it was probably the self-publishing podcast, or maybe it's Kevin's podcast, Wordslinger. And then more recently, I've been on like Simon Whistler's Rock and Self-Publishing podcast and a few others. So I'm trying to, get myself out there because I love you guys and I love podcasting and it's a great experience. Telltale. Yeah, so I mentioned I started with Land of Gods writing, right, back in the day. Well, the reason I did that was because I had read the Game of Thrones books, the first 4, and I was waiting for the 5th. It might have even been the first 3 and I was waiting for the 4th. I don't really remember what year those were. But anyway, so Game of Thrones, and I'm like, man, I love these books. I love Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, et cetera, et cetera. I want more like it. I can't find any more. Maybe I'll try writing one and just see what happens, right? Obviously it's not going to be as good, but I'll at least, if I have this burning passion for these stories, why don't I try to put them on the page also? And so I did. And so Game of Thrones influenced me to write Land of Gods and that whole series. And he had done it based on Wars of the Roses, in Europe. And so I thought, well, why don't I base mine on the Peloponnesian War? Because I just finished a cool class in my master's program on the Peloponnesian War. And the whole class was about, realism and all these things. And it was awesome. It was cool. And all these betrayal and, people stabbing each other in the back and whatnot. So I based that on that. And la comes along. I can tell you that story if you're curious. I get into Telltale Games and I'm there and I'm suddenly writing on Game of Thrones. And so it really was like this life-changing, eye-opening, like, wow, I've made it. I'm done. I can stop now is how I felt kind of, because I'm actually writing on the thing that inspired me to write in the first place. So in that sense, I can just say like, yeah, working at Telltale Games was awesome. I did 2 years there. Working on video games is really cool because you get to, see and they're pretty quick around their turnaround too, which not all games are. Like you'll write something like 3 months later, it'll be in a game that's on the market. And some people would argue that, the opposite, some annoyed fans, but as far as the quick turnaround. But it's really cool because you'll be writing and all of a sudden you'll be like, oh my God, Marjorie from Game of Thrones is saying my lines that I just wrote. This is so cool. And all the other actors, you had Tyrion in there, you had these great actors. And then of course, our characters that we made up, those actors. And and then coming up with like the choices and all that, like in Telltale Games, it's for people who don't know, it's all about choices. It's like all about role playing. So you're in these scenarios, it's more like a TV show and you're making moral dilemma style choices every once in a while. And that changes how the game goes around you, kind of like role playing.
Kind of like a Find Your Own Fate type book?
Kind of, but it doesn't go like, one of those will go like dead end, dead end, dead end. This is more about like, now this person's going to hate you for the rest of the game. And that's going to change this thing over here. So it's more like how things change versus you fail, you fail, you fail. So it's kind of cool. You never really fail, which is not like, oh, you will always really fail, depending on how you want to look at it. And that's one of the big things is always making sure that every choice has like a failure and a success in it so that you don't always feel like you're making the right or the wrong. We're not trying to teach people moral lessons here. We're trying to make you have a crazy experience, And so that was really fun because that helped my fiction writing too. In that sense of thinking about those like moral dilemma choices along the way. And like the character will be doing that anyway. And it's cool to maybe think about a few of them and then pick the one that seems the most awesome and maybe the one that doesn't come to your head first. But it also kind of made me think of that the reader is, the idea that the reader is living through the protagonist. If you're reading a story, certain stories, thrillers do this less so, but a lot of stories like stick to Harry Potter. You are Harry Potter for the duration of that novel, basically. If he gets slapped in the face, you got slapped in the face. And maybe not always, and a lot of authors don't do this, but that's something I really took away from my Telltale time is like, I really try to incorporate that into my writing so that you feel you are one with this character. So if they go and do something that's like a horrible example, let's not use a horrible example. Let's use a less horrible example. If that character just randomly kills somebody on the side of the street, you're going to be like, well, screw this novel and throw it away, right? Because that character's stupid now. You don't want to be that character anymore. And so that's what I'm talking about here is the idea that the reader really wants to, in some way, be the character. And like I said, exceptions to the rules, of course. Always exceptions to the rules. And there's lots of books I can think of that are not that way. But in my fiction, that's what I love to read. And that's what I love to write. And even when you're reading Game of Thrones, and you're reading like the bad guy's point of view, George Martin does a wonderful, job of making sure that you kind of get where that character is coming from. And you could almost be that person if you had these horrible situations that happened to you in life, kind of, maybe.
Yeah, he's very good at that. Was it only Game of Thrones, or did you work on any other games?
Yeah, I worked on Tales from the Borderlands, Minecraft Story Mode, and Walking Dead Michonne.
Ah, okay, cool.
All great experiences.
All right, so when I joined your email lists, I did find a nonfiction email list also.
Oh, yeah, I still have that in there too. Good.
Yeah. So you have that creative writing careers book. You also have a military veterans and creative careers.
Yeah.
Or how'd you get involved in that?
Yeah. So I was in the Marines for 5 years. And as I kind of mentioned, that influenced Land of Gods. What happened was my grandma kept asking me to write a journal about my military time and my travels around the world, because I'd, separate from the military, also traveled around the world. And so writing that book was kind of my way of doing that, because I tried to write a journal, on the page into it, I was like, this is stupid. I hate this. And so then I thought, well, why don't I write a fictional version of that? So in the book, and people have said this in the reviews too, you feel like, he's going through Marine Corps boot camp kind of, because that's kind of what happens. He goes to this kind of like Spartan-esque training where it's kind of a mixture of 300 versus modern day Marine Corps Full Metal Jacket,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where all that came from, was kind of that influence from the military. And a lot of my other books too have that. Back by Sunrise, the little girl's dad, early on in the story dies, and the story is about her dealing with the grief. It's very much a Land Before Time, written in modern, urban, whatever settings. Mm-hmm. And then same thing with Allie Strom, The Ring of Solomon. Her mom is in the military. I'll put quotations and marks around that because there's some reveals around this that you'll find out through reading the book, if you haven't yet. And so yeah, military ties very much into my fiction and who I am. And it also is great as far as a networking tool, because it's kind of like you have this big alumni network of other veterans if you served in the military. Like, a lot of these people are willing to help each other out, and there's a lot of veterans in Hollywood for screenwriters. There's a group called the Veterans in Film and Television, which is great about this. So anyway, yeah, I wanted to interview a bunch of these veterans in screenwriting and writing for video games and writing for novels, and put them together in a book with my own advice thrown in there. And then I started a podcast on it too, although the podcast is now, after 44 episodes, on hiatus. Mm-hmm. We're trying to figure out how to rebrand, because it wasn't as successful as Creative Writing Career Podcast was. So we're just trying to see if there's a better way to approach that, because maybe we were too broad. Because in that podcast, Military Veterans and Creative Careers, it was creative careers. It's all over the place. There's not one specific, it wasn't just focused on writing or anything. And actually the book wasn't either. The book was acting and directing and producing and all that stuff. So it's interesting for any military veteran who's thinking, oh, I want to do something cool, and they can like flip to whatever part interests them most. But it's not like something you would tune in necessarily every week, because it doesn't always apply to you. So
yeah. Makes sense.
And then now I'm working actually as an editor. So I left Telltale Games to go do something totally different and work as an editor/writer at military.com. So I'm writing articles helping veterans transition into the civilian world. And I still throw some creativity in there. Like I did one about Game of Thrones, where it's basically four lessons you can learn for the civilian workplace from Game of Thrones, something like that. I forget what the title was exactly. It's just kind of fun. It's about like, watch out, because you never know who you align with might have their head chopped off the next day. You never know when you're going to walk into work and your boss is just going to be fired, or your coworker that you were like best buddies with is going to be fired. And yeah, but 4 other great lessons. You got to read the article to learn.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit about how you came up with some of your ideas for your books. I know you talked about the fantasy one being very inspired by your military background. I mean, what about the children's ones? What inspired you to do those particular stories?
So inspiration for the other stories, for the children's stories, it's really that I love all those stories. Like I'm a diehard Disney fan. I'm a diehard Pixar fan. I want to go to Disneyland, not for my kids so much as for me, and to watch the experience that my kids have when they go for the first time, because that's exciting. Mm-hmm. And so it's really just that I'm a kid at heart, and always will be, I'm sure. And then like I mentioned, in part it was because I had the screenplays. So I wrote the screenplays with the idea of that maybe someday I can get into Pixar or Disney. So I want to start getting ready now and have a lot of work in that genre that I'll be able to learn from and grow from, and maybe come back to someday and use. And of course, if they get made into movies, that'll be awesome. And I rewrote those, and in the process said, well, now that they're just sitting around on the shelves, because animation screenplays are super hard to sell. It rarely happens. So knowing that, I said, okay, well, I might as well turn them into novels and at least share them with the world. And I'm glad I have. It's been a really interesting experience. Most of the reviews I get are from adults, Not all. There was a weird one I got the other day that's obviously from a kid who rambles on about French fries in between the middle of the review. But the ones you get from adults are cool, crazy, because you're like some military guy in his like 50s emails me and tells me how he started bawling in the middle of my book, and I'm just like, what? That's so. I mean, it's sad that people cry, but when it's related to literature, it's awesome because something's touching them emotionally. You know, to have written a book that touches somebody so emotionally, even though it's a book for kids, feels great.
Have you adapted those to screenplay then?
Well, so those were screenplays first.
Okay.
Yeah, those two. So, Back by Sunrise and then Teddy Bears and Monsterland were both screenplays first. Allie Strom and The Ring of Solomon, I adapted into a screenplay after it was a novel. Other ones, it's been here and there. I think those are the main ones I have. I wrote this literary novel called Mohira, and it's about a woman from Central Asia dealing with life in America after divorce. She's from a Muslim family, and they want to embrace that back home, and then ethnic violence breaks out against her people back home too. So she really feels like she has no place to belong, and she's trying to, stand up and live her life and figure out who she is. Totally different from my other stuff. That one I tried to adapt, or I started to try to adapt into a novel. What did I write it? No, it was a novel. I tried to adapt it into a screenplay, but like 10 pages into it, I was just like, man, I do not know how to approach this. It's like, I know for sure when it comes to screenwriting, I'm more of a kind of a genre writer. I'm not that guy who's going to write like the top Sundance winner for just regular drama, literary awesomeness. That's somebody way smarter than me.
So I'm guessing because of your children's ones would probably be animation most likely. Do you find animation a little bit more difficult sell when trying to option or not?
Yeah. Like all the big studios, they don't really do that. They all have in-house stuff. People write their animation ideas and they come up with it in-house. And there's companies out there, and I've had like Back by Sunrise was kind of optioned by a small producer who had something going on, but then it didn't work out. And like maybe foreign countries sometimes approach me for these kind of things. But that hasn't worked out, and it's definitely tough. There's a kid's one that me and that Sean and I did together, actually. Sean Platt, again, just like Crash, we adapted his, he has a pen name, Guy Incognito. It's children's books, and he has one called Santa Claus Exposed, and it's a Christmas thing, and it's about one
that could go either way. Who knows what that story could be like?
Maybe that's why the title's a little confusing. I don't know. But yeah, it's about the kids, mystery, kind of trying to solve if Santa Claus is real or not. And that's fun. And we adapted that, and that would be live action, I imagine. Somebody could do it animated if they wanted to, but it definitely feels better as live action. It's not pure comedic, and it's not pure, like, there's no children turning into animals and flying around or anything like that. So
cool.
Yeah, we're actually sending that one out to producers next week. So maybe by the time this airs or something, or soon after, I can have some updates on that. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. And whenever you do adaptations, what did you learn about doing that process? Like, trying to figure out what should stay in it and what needs to change, and when going to a visual medium?
Yeah, so it's tough, of course. Going from novel to screenplay, the main thing is with a novel, you have all this internal thought going on, and that's what helps the story make a lot of sense. So trying to figure out more cinematic ways for all that to happen. Trying to think if I have any good examples right now. I don't off the top of my head, but in a main scene, if you have something that the character is thinking, you got to find either you got to pair that character up with another person so that they can verbalize it, or you got to decide, is it worth having in the story? Does it really add that much? Maybe you cut it, or maybe instead of her saying an object meant so much to her, or something was given by her grandma, or internally thinking it, you have her just pick it up and look at it, and that moment means something to her. She puts it down, and then later in the movie, you can somehow reference it with the grandma or with a picture of the grandma, and she puts it next to it and looks at them again, and you realize, oh, the grandma gave that to her, or something like this. So there's more visual ways that you need to approach screenwriting, because if it's just talking a whole lot, then that's a play, or if it's all internal, maybe that's a novel. John Monk's book, John L. Monk, the novel Kick that we're adapting, that one has a lot of narration, because the guy kind of has to explain to us what's going on and why he's doing this whole like jumping into different bodies thing. Just like Quantum Leap, as weird as that show is, I tried to watch it again yesterday, and wow, it's different. It's different as I remember it. That one too had a lot of narration, internal dialogue, because it's just like such a weird, like body hopping kind of thing. Like it's so weird to explain in just a visual way. So that'll be quite fun for us to figure out as we move forward.
Yeah. I read recently the novellas Karma Police by Wright and Platt. Yeah. And I was thinking, this is a really good story, but it would be difficult because it's so much is right, in her head. So
is that a body hopper novel? It is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, I have to check that out. Haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I like it. I like Wright and Platt together. I mean, I like Truant, Johnny B. Truant too, but I dig David's little dark
Yeah.
edginess.
Nice. Yeah, for
um,
sure.
so I think we covered quite a bit. Just to remind people, you also have that nonfiction book, Creative Writing Careers. I've been starting to read that book. I've been really enjoying it.
Cool.
I really liked how, like, for example, in one chapter you talk about the different type of plotting structure options are out there that are some of the more popular ones. I didn't know the sequence one for some reason, or at least I don't think
sequence is great. It's the main thing that USC teaches. USC Film School, University of Southern California, for people who don't know, is like one of the main film schools that's out there, and that's what they teach, is the sequence approach, and it's awesome. And what pisses me off beyond all belief is some of these people who write structure books for novelists. And it's like, this has never been done, or nobody's ever written a structure book for novelists before. And then they just take these exact same principles and just write them the same. And that's it. Just, yeah, so frustrating. But anyway, yeah, I like that part of the book too, because that was one of my goals, is I wanted to show people that people know this, but I wanted to lay it out there for people who don't, for like aspiring writers starting off, that there are multiple ways you can approach structure. And in a way, it's all the same. And I laid out my teddy bear story saying, here's how that plays out in this. And it's kind of repetitive, but in the same sense, it shows it's all the same stuff. It all can lead to the same story. And maybe you write your story first and then go look at those ways of doing structure, so you can see, oh, okay, here's where I should hit more of an emotional beat here or that. And you don't have to use it as, a rule book. It could be more of guidelines, or it could be more of just helping you figure out after the fact what's wrong, like what you didn't really do right. Not that you have to do it a certain way, but if the story is feeling flat, maybe it's because you didn't have some emotional ups and downs that you need to at certain points to make the audience reach the levels of their expectations from having watched so many movies and read so many books throughout the ages. You know what I mean? So that book, just to give a quick version of where that came from, I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco as an Asia analyst, and that was my job. I was doing Taiwan, India, a little bit of Korea, a little bit of Japan, fun stuff. And I thought, I need to be a writer. Up to that point, I was writing, but I was doing it on the side. I was like, I could be two-tracked me. I could do both. And then I was like, no, I refuse to do both anymore. I'm going to go 100% writer. And so I started networking like crazy, emailing people, going on LinkedIn with everybody I could find, blah, 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 blah. I've told this story on Self-Publishing Podcast and other places. But what I did then is I thought, well, wait, I just spent all this time asking all these questions. Why would I just throw them away in my brain when I could throw them on some paper and make a book out of it? And so that's what I did there, is I took everything I'd been learning from that process of talking to people, reading books, what have you, listening to podcasts, watching movies, whatever. And I put it in the book. And I then, as you know, talked to a bunch of these people who I had already spoken to, or new people, reached out to them and said, hey, I'm putting this book together. Would you like to interview in it and just give your advice on how to break into writing and what it means to be a writer? And so a lot of awesome people did, like Joshua Rubin, who wrote on Assassin's Creed 2 and won an award for that. Awesome guy. He had some great advice about getting into video games, going to the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. Will White, who's an awesome novelist who wrote House of Blades, which is a really cool self-published book. It's probably one of the first self-published books that made me realize self-published books can be awesome. Yeah. Before that, I was one of those guys who had that stigma against him, and I read that and I was like, yeah. And then it just kept spiraling, find John L. Monk's book, find P.T. Hilton's Zane Holloway book, find all these books that are just like way better than a lot of the traditionally published stuff that's out there. And anyway, so I got a lot of these cool authors to be part of that, and screenwriters and whatnot. And then Stefan Bugaj, who worked at Pixar for 12, 14 years, worked at Telltale Games, and is now producing movies down in LA. He wrote book 2 with me. And so we got his input in there as well. And then more awesome, higher level, even than I knew I could get a hold of, people who were interviewed in that, like some writers from Divergent and Game of Thrones, the TV show, the guy who produced all the Batman movies and wrote on the comics, I think, some other people that are awesome and amazing. So doing those 2 books is really cool for me, because that helped me grow as a writer and as a person. And of course helped with the networking as well, because I get to therefore talk to all these people that I otherwise would just be like, hey, can you talk to me? And they'd be like, what for? But in this case, it's to do a book, or as it led to the podcast. And then I get them on the podcast, and then they share all that cool information firsthand with everybody else listening. So as you know, from doing podcasts, it's an awesome experience where you get to sit down with sometimes boring, but usually interesting people and have great conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's why
none of my guests have ever been boring. Sorry, just to throw that out there.
We're getting about time to wrap things up here. So before we do, what are you working on right now? Yeah,
well, first, of course, the one with Michael Laron, So we're done with book 1. We're in the middle of book 2. We're moving full steam on that, and we have book 3 kind of somewhat outlined. So our goal is to go like month with the publishing schedule on that. 1 month, 1 month, 1 month. And that's going to be exciting. And really, it's kind of like dark fantasy, modern day necromancy, like a guy who wants to bring his wife back from the dead. And then the guy who's going to lead him there betrays him and things go wrong. And now he has to decide, do I keep trying to get my wife, or do I stop this guy from raising an army of the dead that'll destroy the world type stuff? What? Craziness. And then and then P.T. Hilton and I, like I mentioned, we have our screenplay that we're doing, and I want to turn that into a novel when we're done with that. Because I think it's going to be awesome. Basically, it's like the way I'm looking at it is post-apocalyptic Game of Thrones, but you could also look at it as post-apocalyptic Boardwalk Empire. It's kind of got a little bit of both of those in there. So it's going to be epic. Yeah.
Sounds very cool.
Yeah. If only we had more time in the day, though. That kills me, Oh, and I have book 4 outlined for my Falls of Redemption trilogy, and that is going to blow your mind. Like, you read this book, you're going to be like, what the hell? Because you look at book 1, and it's the first book I ever wrote. So you're probably going to read that, and you're going to be like, this is kind of cool. There's some cool stuff in here. Maybe we'll see what happens in book 2. Book 2, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing here. I see what he's doing. Book 3, you're going to be like, holy crap, this is amazing. And your book 4, you're going to be like, what? Who is Justin Sloan? I want to meet this guy. You'll see. I've actually videotaped that expression over the years of people reading my books. I was just joking. I haven't done it.
Yes. Well, awesome. It's been
you
great.
Not have an ego.
It's been great chatting with you, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hi, I'm Rachel Kane, author of the Morganville Vampire series, and you're listening to GenreTainment.
Thanks to Justin for chatting with me, and also for having me on his podcast. You can find links to everything we discussed in the show notes, and don't forget, by signing up to his email list, you can get a number of his books for free to try out. Before I go, I want to remind you that you can always keep track of us by subscribing to us on iTunes or Stitcher under Sci-Fi Pulse Radio, or by following our GenreTainment Facebook page, my Twitter account, which is @MrMarx, our website at GenreTainment.com, or follow all the shows at SciFiPulseRadio.com. We'll be back soon with all new guests from our favorite films, TV shows, novels, and web series. GenreTainment is a production of Alien Jungle Bug Productions. Until next time.
Bad monkey.